Does pineapple induce labour? I'd love to know your thoughts, whether you tried this, and pop that in the comments below. So I was going to come on here and totally poo-poo the idea that pineapple induces labour, because the only research in the past has been on animal studies and they're not completely representative of the human uterus. But there is now one human study that has looked at randomising women into a pineapple category or a non-pineapple category. So let's take a look. So why pineapples? So in a pineapple, there is an enzyme called bromelain. Now this is the highest concentration within the stem, but it's also present within the fruit of the pineapple. And it was always traditionally believed that by eating lots of the pineapple fruit, that you would consume a lot of this enzyme bromelain, and that could potentially help with cervical ripening and then potentially trigger the onset of labour. The theory behind the pineapple bromelain enzyme is that it helps to stimulate and trigger the prostaglandin secretion release, which helps with the cervical dilation, helps with the effacement, and can potentially trigger labour. And all previous evidence has suggested that there is no evidence to suggest that pineapple can induce labour. However, on searching, there is a 2023 publication, so fairly recent research, investigating the effect of eating pineapple on the ripening of the cervix and the onset of labour. Now, before I go through this research study in a bit more detail, I just want to highlight this has not been peer-reviewed yet. This is a preliminary report that you can freely access, freely search yourself, but we do have to be really cautious with these results because it hasn't been scrutiny to the peer review process yet. It is also an incredibly small study as well. It looked at only 66 pregnant women, of which there were people who had to be dropped out of that 66. And in the control group, they had 6 people that were dropped out. There was also 2 people who were excluded. Within this study, women were between 40 and 41 weeks of pregnancy. The vaginal examination performed prior to the consumption of the pineapple itself, and that examination was looking at the Bishop score, so how favourable, how open, how soft, how dilated, how effaced that cervix was. There was no difference between the Bishop score in the intervention or the control group. The women in the group taking the pineapple had to consume 250 grams of fresh pineapple for 3 days in a row. It was up to them as to whether they consumed it entirely in one go or whether they spread it out throughout the day. And within this study, they looked at a huge amount of different details. For example, the vaginal examinations, the Bishop score, the length of labour, and they explored the use of oxytocin as well. In terms of the outcomes for this very small study that hasn't been peer reviewed, so we have to be really cautious with the interpretation of these results. For the women who consumed pineapple, they were less likely to need or require oxytocin either as augmentation or for the induction of labour process compared to the women who did not consume pineapple. Women who consumed the pineapple were also more likely to have a higher Bishop score on arrival compared to women who did not consume the pineapple. And in the group who consumed pineapple, there was a higher cervical dilation and also a higher chance of the waters rupturing on their own compared to the control group. However, it must be noted that the women who consumed that pineapple were much more likely to have blood-stained secretions, so blood-stained liquor and more blood during that labour process. So overall, pineapple, you can absolutely try it. It's being aware though that lots of pineapple can cause digestive discomfort. It can cause an upset tummy as well from a risk perspective. There needs to be a lot more research and peer-reviewed research, randomised control trials exploring pineapple in more detail and whether it does cause an onset and a trigger or a stimulation of spontaneous labour, how it works on that cervix in a lot further detail. And we need far more research in this area. Currently, there is not enough evidence to say that pineapple does induce labour. There is also not enough evidence to suggest that it is safe, and we need to be cautious in relation to the bloodstained liquor as well coming out in the pineapple group. But as always, it's about informed decision making. Pineapple, for women who like the taste of pineapple, you can absolutely try it. I hope one day that we've got more research to say whether or not pineapple does or does not trigger labour.